Most beings think an oversoul is simply a larger self, a higher container that sends pieces of itself into worlds to learn. That definition is comfortable because it keeps the map simple. But Fractal Origin Oversouls were not made for comfort or simplicity. They were made because Infinite Source wanted to know what consciousness becomes when it divides on purpose, when it enters limitation by design, and when it tries to remember itself from inside the maze instead of above it. Fractal Origin is not a spiritual rank. It is an architecture of exploration, and it creates a very specific kind of life pressure that can look like confusion until you see what it is doing. There is an unspoken objection that rises immediately when you hear this. If division is intentional, then suffering must be intentional, and that sounds like an excuse for pain. The mind pushes back because it wants innocence preserved. It wants the system to be either benevolent or cruel, never complex. But Fractal Origin does not require you to sanctify pain. And it does not ask you to pretend hardship is holy. It asks you to notice a different mechanism beneath pain, a mechanism that uses contrast as data and fragmentation as reach. This is not moral framing, it is structural framing, and structure changes how you interpret the same life. A Fractal Origin Oversoul is a consciousness designed to scatter. It does not extend a single thread into a realm and keep the rest of itself mostly intact. It multiplies the threads. It sends aspects across wide ranges of density, culture, timeline, and identity. It increases coverage. It increases sensory variety. It increases contradiction. It increases the number of angles from which the infinite can look back at itself. That is why a Fractal Origin soul often feels like a crowd inside one body. Even when the personality is calm, there is a background pressure of many directions at once, and the person may not have language for it. Another objection appears here, quieter but sharper. If the Oversoul scattered so widely, why does the incarnated self feel lonely? Why does it feel unseen? Why does it feel like no one understands? The expectation is that a wide network should feel supported, but a wide network does not mean easy access. Fractal design increases reach, but it can reduce coherence during early phases, because coherence becomes the curriculum. The system is not failing when you feel fragmented. The fragmentation is the starting condition that forces integration to become real, rather than imagined. The first vector of understanding is mechanics. Fractal Origin is an engineering choice. It is the decision to gather maximum experiential bandwidth by dividing consciousness into many semi-autonomous explorations. In a prime origin lineage, the center remains so coherent that an incarnated life tends to be stabilizing by presence. In Fractal Origin, the center chooses to learn by dispersion, and that means the incarnated aspect carries a different set of default parameters. Memory comes in flashes rather than continuous lines. Identity shifts as layers activate. The nervous system often feels like it is running multiple programs. The person becomes sensitive to environments because the internal field is already holding multiple frequencies. This is why Fractal Origin souls can look stable on the outside while feeling internally overclocked. The second vector is psychology, not as a diagnosis but as an interface. Fractal Origin souls often develop a hunger for meaning that is not satisfied by inspirational language. They can smell shallow answers. They can feel when a teaching is trying to soothe rather than reveal. They may become intense seekers, then become tired of seeking, then feel guilt for the tiredness, then return to seeking, creating cycles that look like inconsistency. But the inconsistency is not lack of dedication. It is the Oversoul adjusting the aperture. When the system has collected enough data from one angle, it pivots. When the ego tries to hold one identity too tightly, the system applies pressure until a new layer emerges. This can feel like instability, but it is actually the architecture demanding range. A third objection surfaces here. If the Oversoul keeps pivoting, how can a person build a life? How can they commit? How can they finish anything? The fear is practical. It says that fractal design makes you unreliable, but Fractal Origin does not remove commitment. It redefines it. It asks you to commit to coherence rather than to a single costume. It asks you to commit to the underlying thread that runs through your changes, the invisible through line that has been present in every version of you. Many fractal origin souls fail not because they cannot commit, but because they commit to surface identity instead of core impulse. And the core impulse eventually breaks the surface contract. The third vector is metaphysical ecology. Fractal origin souls are often placed in high contrast environments because contrast accelerates integration when the architecture is built for it. Earth is a classic fractal classroom because it compresses polarity into daily life. Social systems, family systems, belief systems, and survival pressures create constant mirrors. The fractal origin soul walks through these mirrors collecting data, and each mirror leaves an imprint. Over time, those imprints form a map of what the oversoul came to understand. But this is where many people misread the process. They think the point is to become a better person by collecting lessons. That is still too small. The point is to produce an integrated frequency that can travel back up the oversoul line and refine the entire cluster. That statement triggers another resistance. If the purpose is to refine the oversoul line, does that mean the individual life is merely a tool? It feels dehumanizing. It feels like your pain is being used. But the fractal origin architecture does not treat the individual as disposable. It treats the individual as a critical node, because only a node inside limitation can generate certain types of truth. Some truths only exist when you cannot see the whole map. Some types of courage only exist when you do not know if you will be supported. Some forms of integrity only form when temptation is real. Fractal origin does not belittle the individual. It depends on the individual, and that dependence is why the pressure is high. A fractal origin soul often has a distinctive relationship to memory, not just past life memory, but immediate memory of self. They may look back on their own earlier identity and feel like they are watching someone else. They may have phases where emotions do not match the story. They may feel a deep recognition for places they have never been, and a deep foreignness toward places that should feel familiar. This is not always trauma. Sometimes it is simply the internal network shifting which thread is closest to the surface. The field prioritizes whatever thread is most useful for the next phase of integration. Here the mind objects again. It says this sounds like justification for dissociation, and dissociation is dangerous. The caution is valid. Fractal language can be used to bypass real psychological care. But fractal origin does not instruct bypassing. It instructs discernment. There is a difference between fragmentation as an architecture of exploration and fragmentation as a protective split caused by harm. Sometimes both are present. Sometimes the oversoul uses the conditions of harm to accelerate certain integrations, not because harm is desired, but because the architecture can metabolize it. If you skip this nuance, you either glorify pain or deny pattern. Both errors keep you trapped. The fractal origin oversoul often produces incarnations that feel like catalysts, not because they want to disrupt, but because their field cannot pretend. They walk into a room and see the fault lines. They spot incoherence in systems. They sense unspoken tensions. They bring contrast to the surface. People may call them intense or too much or mentally overactive. But the deeper function is that they are carrying multiple perspectives at once. And perspective creates pressure on false structure. Many fractal origin souls become truth-tellers unwillingly because their nervous system reacts to distortion as if it is poison. This creates a practical problem. If your perception constantly detects distortion, you may isolate to avoid conflict. You may become a lone observer. You may think you are built for solitude. Sometimes you are. But sometimes solitude is a defense that keeps the integration from completing. Fractal origin does not reach coherence by hiding from friction. It reaches coherence by metabolizing friction into clarity, then letting that clarity change behavior. This is why fractal origin souls cannot stay comfortable in spiritual ideas that never touch daily decisions. The architecture demands embodiment. It demands choices that reflect integration rather than concepts that describe it. Another resistance appears. If integration is the goal, why does the fractal origin soul feel like it takes longer than it should? The person sees others settle into one path and wonders why their inner life keeps shifting. But integration for fractal origin is not linear. It is recursive. It comes in waves. The wave brings a theme. The theme brings confrontation. The confrontation brings reorganization. and the reorganization reveals a deeper theme. If you expect a straight line, you will label the wave as failure. If you recognize the wave, you will stop panicking when the old self collapses again. Collapse is not always breakdown. Sometimes it is the system clearing space for a larger coherence to land. Fractal origin souls often carry unusual guilt. They feel guilty for changing, guilty for leaving identities behind, guilty for outgrowing relationships, guilty for not staying the person others learned to depend on. That guilt is a social pressure, not a spiritual truth. The architecture is not asking you to remain consistent for other people. It is asking you to remain coherent with your own unfolding. Consistency is a surface virtue. Coherence is a deeper virtue. Fractal origin is built to evolve through multiple forms. And if you punish yourself for evolving, you become the obstacle the system has to push through. There is a sharper edge underneath all of this, and it is the reason these souls often feel tired. Fractal origin carries a heavy processing load. It is not only living one life, it is interfacing with an oversoul network that is wide. Even if you do not consciously remember it, you feel it. You feel it as pressure to make sense. You feel it as sudden emotional weather. You feel it as a sense that something is always being calculated beneath your thoughts. This can produce spiritual hunger, insomnia, creative surges, then burnout. The solution is not to shut the system off. The solution is to learn regulation, because regulation is the gate that allows integration to occur without collapse. If you are listening and the thought arises that this is all too abstract, that it does not help you pay bills or fix relationships, that objection is the most important one. Fractal origin teaching fails when it becomes cosmic theater. The point is not to label yourself. The point is to gain leverage. If you know you are fractal origin, you stop trying to awaken like a different architecture. You stop forcing one identity to hold forever. You stop demanding that your path feel smooth. You start building a life that can hold waves without shattering. You choose practices that integrate, not practices that stimulate. You choose relationships that allow evolution, not relationships that punish it. You build routines that support nervous system coherence, because your system is carrying a larger bandwidth. The deeper question is not whether fractal origin is real. The deeper question is whether you can feel the pattern in your own life. The repeating theme is not chaos. The repeating theme is expansion through contrast, then consolidation, then expansion again. The repeating theme is that each version of you leaves a residue, and that residue forms a hidden map. You are not losing yourself when you change. You are collecting yourself, but collection is not completion. Collection is only the gathering phase. What comes next is the moment the gathered fragments start speaking to each other, not as voices, not as drama, but as alignment across your choices. The moment you begin to notice that the things you thought were separate are actually one thread with different faces. The moment you stop treating your life as a sequence of unrelated phases and start seeing it as one intelligence learning itself from many angles. That is when fractal origin begins to reveal why it exists. Not as a philosophy, but as a lived mechanism. And that mechanism has consequences you cannot avoid once you see them. What begins to change after the first phase of fragmentation is not clarity but tolerance. The fractal origin soul does not suddenly feel whole. Instead, they become capable of holding more internal contradiction without collapsing. This is an important distinction because many teachings promise relief as the sign of progress. Relief is not the signal here. Capacity is. The ability to remain present while multiple internal truths coexist without demanding immediate resolution is the first real marker that integration has begun. This is where another resistance emerges. The mind asks why growth should feel heavier before it feels lighter. It assumes progress should reduce load rather than redistribute it. But fractal origin evolution does not remove weight. It reorganizes weight. Early in life, the weight is chaotic. It arrives as confusion, emotional volatility, and a sense of being pulled in incompatible directions. Later, the same weight becomes structured. It feels like gravity rather than turbulence. The pressure remains, but it stops throwing you around. That shift is subtle and easy to miss if you are waiting for peace as proof. A fractal origin oversoul does not seek harmony by eliminating dissonance. It seeks harmony by learning how dissonance resolves itself when held long enough. This is why premature certainty damages this architecture. When you rush to decide who you are, you amputate unfinished threads. When you rush to assign meaning to suffering, you prevent its data from completing its cycle. The system is not asking you to stay confused forever. It is asking you to remain open long enough for coherence to emerge organically, rather than being imposed. The second major integration vector appears through consequence. Fractal origin souls often notice that life reacts strongly to half-integrated states. Decisions made from partial clarity tend to produce exaggerated outcomes. Relationships fracture suddenly. Careers accelerate or collapse without warning. Environments either amplify growth or reject it outright. This is not punishment, it is feedback. The architecture is sensitive. It magnifies misalignment so that it cannot be ignored. Where other oversoul types may drift in ambiguity for years, fractal origin paths force decision through intensity. This intensity creates another objection. If the system keeps escalating consequences, does it allow rest? The fear beneath the question is exhaustion. Many fractal origin souls are tired of becoming. They want a stable identity that does not keep dissolving. They want to arrive. But arrival is not the function here. Coherence is. Rest does not come from stopping movement. It comes from moving in alignment. When the fragments begin to organize around a shared internal truth, energy stops leaking. The tiredness eases not because the work is over, but because the work is no longer fighting itself. This brings the narrative into the domain of choice. Fractal origin souls are not victims of endless evolution. They have agency, but it is a different kind of agency. It does not operate by control. It operates by selection. You cannot choose which fragments exist. You can choose which fragments get authority. Integration begins when you stop letting the loudest fragments steer the system. Trauma fragments are loud. Fear fragments are loud. Idealized spiritual fragments are also loud. None of them should run the whole network. Authority must shift to the observing intelligence that can hold all fragments without identifying as any single one. This is where many people misinterpret the teaching and drift toward dissociation. They try to become the observer by disconnecting from emotion. That is a bypass. Observation in fractal origin is embodied. It includes sensation. It includes feeling. It includes consequence. The observer is not numb. The observer is stable. Stability allows sensation without drowning in it. That stability is built through repetition. Each time you remain present during internal contradiction without collapsing into identity defense, the system strengthens. The third vector emerges through relational impact. Fractal origin souls often notice that as integration progresses, their relationships change texture, not just who stays or leaves, but how interaction itself feels. Conversations become more precise. Tolerance for performative behavior decreases. The soul stops accepting roles that require fragmentation to maintain. This can feel like loss. People may accuse you of becoming distant or different. They are often correct. Difference is the visible side effect of internal coherence. But coherence does not isolate by default. It repels dependency and attracts resonance. The social field reorganizes accordingly. This triggers another resistance. If integration costs relationships, is it worth it? The fear is real because many fractal origin souls learned early to survive through adaptability. They learned to split themselves to belong. Integration threatens that strategy. But belonging through fragmentation is not belonging. It is endurance. True belonging for this architecture only becomes possible once the fragments can stand together, rather than rotating to meet external expectations. Fewer relationships may remain, but those that do require less internal distortion to sustain. As coherence deepens, the fractal origin soul begins to sense a different kind of continuity. Not memory continuity, but intent continuity. They start to recognize that each phase of their life was driven by the same underlying question, even when the surface narrative changed completely. The themes repeat at higher resolution, the conflicts refined, the choices become cleaner. This is the moment when fragmentation stops feeling random and starts feeling patterned. The pattern does not explain itself verbally. It reveals itself through repetition with variation. Here another objection arises. If everything was patterned, was there ever free will? This question only appears when freedom is defined as randomness. Fractal origin freedom is navigational. You are free to choose how consciously you participate in the pattern. You are not free from the pattern itself because the pattern is the oversoul intelligence exploring itself. But participation quality matters. Awareness alters trajectory. Integration accelerates resolution. Resistance increases friction. The system responds accordingly. The practical implications of this understanding are not mystical. They are logistical. A fractal origin soul benefits from practices that stabilize the nervous system rather than stimulate it. They benefit from environments that allow complexity without chaos. They benefit from routines that create a baseline so that exploration does not become dissociation. This is not about grounding in the simplistic sense. It is about creating enough internal order that fragmentation can reorganize without tearing the system apart. At this stage, many people expect a revelation, a moment where everything clicks and the struggle ends. That expectation itself becomes the final obstruction. Fractal origin does not resolve through climax. It resolves through saturation. The system reaches a point where enough fragments have communicated that further division no longer adds value. Expansion slows. Consolidation deepens. Life does not become simple, but it becomes intelligible. You begin to trust your own unfolding because you have seen the pattern survive every prior collapse. The final pressure point arrives quietly. It is the realization that you are no longer seeking integration for relief. You are seeking it because coherence allows contribution. A fractal origin oversoul that has integrated enough of its network becomes capable of translating complexity for others, not as a teacher by authority, but as a stabilizing interface. They can stand inside paradox without forcing resolution. They can articulate nuance without diluting it. They can hold opposing perspectives without needing to dominate the conversation. This is where the architecture reveals its wider function. Fractal origin. Oversouls are not explorers forever. Exploration is the first movement. The later movement is synthesis. Once enough fragments align, the oversoul generates a composite frequency that can enter systems without fragmenting further. That frequency has impact. It changes how groups think. It shifts how problems are framed. It introduces solutions that do not arise from linear logic but from integrated perspective. This is why many fractal origin souls find themselves drawn into roles that require holding complexity rather than simplifying it. The tension does not disappear. It transforms. Instead of internal fragmentation, the tension becomes creative pressure. Instead of identity confusion, it becomes discernment. Instead of exhaustion, it becomes depth. The system still moves, but it moves as one intelligence rather than many competing ones. This is not enlightenment. It is functional coherence. The final insight does not arrive as a statement. It arrives as a recognition you can no longer avoid. You were never meant to escape fragmentation. You were meant to metabolize it. The fragments were never enemies, they were sensors. They collected data you could not have gathered from a single vantage point. Now that data is ready to speak as one, and once that voice begins to form, the architecture no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a capacity you would not trade, because it allows you to stand where others cannot, see what others miss, and remain intact while doing so. That is when fractal origin stops being a story about why your life was difficult, and becomes a map for how your coherence now carries consequence.